Hello and welcome to the Art of. Today's conversation is titled The Art of Being Precise. The title was suggested by our guest, the pioneer of algorithmic art, Frieder Nake. Frieder, I'm so happy that you have accepted our invitation. And instead of introducing you by reading out your biography, I've made a little film that dares to summarize at least a part of your life in 3 minutes. Please, could you play the film?
In 1958, Frieder Nake starts to study mathematics at the Technical University of Stuttgart. In 1961, he begins to work as an assistant at the university's computer center. The course of Frieder's life changes when, in 1963, a flatbed drawing machine, the präzisen Z64, is installed there. In early 1964, Frieder produces a series of abstract drawings by applying random processes. Philosopher Max Bense, one of the founders of information aesthetics, provides the theoretical framework. Art should become measurable, beauty programmable. In 1965, through an article in Der Spiegel, Frieder's work receives visibility on a national scale. Especially in the years 1965 to 1968, he produces a large number of graphics. With great care, he chooses paper quality and the colors of ink. From 1965 on, Frieder participates in numerous exhibitions, among others, the legendary Cybernetic Serendipity in London and Tendencies for Computers and Visual Research in Zagreb. It's in Zagreb where he states clearly how society should use computers.
Wir müssen uns an folgendes Programm halten: Rationalität im Dienste des Menschen.
In 1968, he joins the University of Toronto by invitation of Leslie Mazzei and then moves on to the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. In 1971, Frieder writes his famous manifesto, "There should be no computer art." Jonathan Bantle presents the paper at the conference Art and Computers in Zagreb.
Questions like, is a computer creative, or is a computer an artist, should not be considered serious questions.
In 1974, Frieder publishes Aesthetics as Information Processing, an ambitious attempt to cover information aesthetics as developed by Bense, Mohl, Frank and Gunzenhäuser. In 1972, Frieder was appointed professor at the University of Bremen. In 2007, he initiates the project CompArt Database, one of the most comprehensive knowledge resources on the history of digital art.
So I will stay with your biography first. And if we look at lives, we tend to think that individual took steps very logically one after the other, and we tend to overlook how improbable certain decisions were, or how much chance decided about our lives. So my first biographical question is, your great passion was literature and theater. I mean, you saw for many years every single theater performance in Germany. And your talent as a writer is obvious. So why did you enroll in mathematics?
Because of my father and me being afraid of, I will not become a famous writer. I wanted to become a famous writer, but then I thought, to become a writer, that's easy, simple, no problem. But to be famous, that's difficult. And maybe it's easier to do something more mundane, mathematics. And indeed, my father said, study something that is worth something, and that's mathematics in your case.
So it wasn't your first love, but did it turn out to be your second love?
In a way, you could say so. I have always loved mathematics. I think, because of the precision in thinking that you need to acquire and to practice. This I like much. I would say, Margit, that these are kind of two souls, no, two orientation in my life, the precise and the unprecise.
We just saw in the film this beautiful automatic drawing table, or this flatbed drawing machine.
Yeah.
And you started to use it when you were an assistant at the computer center of the Stuttgart University. And my question is, what were the original reasons for you to apply random processes in developing software for the machine? And then the other question, what made you think at a certain moment that this is not just a scientific experiment or a technical experiment, but a work of art?
The random things. I had the job, and I was still a student then, to develop the software, the basic software that everybody would have to use if they wanted to do something with that drawing machine. You know? So the drawing machine was there, and of course, the computing center, hoped that everybody, the engineers, would come and use it, and that was my job. Now, developing software always means that you must test it. And that was too complex to do it with mathematical terms. So I had to really test it, experiments. And in that process, my question to myself, of course, was, now, how do I do that systematically? Systematically test such a software. And I decided, that's stupid. You must do it randomly. Instead of systematically testing, do it randomly, trusting that when you do it randomly, the difficult cases will show up. That's the first. The question, and now how does that perhaps live up to aesthetics? I decided artists, everybody knows, have a great intuition. And their art comes from their intuitively doing or not doing something. What then, if I deal with machines, replaces or simulates intuition? And that was randomness. Therefore, I had to do it randomly. The random component, which is, of course, a machinic component, replaces acts instead of the intuition. My intuition is, of course, behind. I stay there. But to the extent that the machine is doing anything, then it's calculated pseudo randomness.
Who were the first people you showed these drawings to and asked them their opinion? Do you remember their reactions?
Yes. I must tell you an anecdote there in order to get into what I really want to answer. In February, 5th of February, I know it, 65, in Bense's institute, Max Bense at the University of Stuttgart, announces, he had always exhibitions of art, computer art will be exhibited. What? There is somebody else in the world who is doing this? I reacted. And then, of course, I go there, I see them. Georg Nees is the fellow who, and then I took the drawings that I had. I had independently, totally, we didn't know anything of each other, in the computing center produced such images. So I went to the gallerist, Wendelin Niedlich, and showed him, Wendy, last Tuesday or whenever it was, you had seen that exhibition. Here I show you graphics that I have done. So what now? And Wendelin says, okay, when do I have my next open time for an exhibition? And therefore I got that exhibition. This is the little anecdote behind. How did people react? Friendly, uninteresting, yeah. I would say, roughly.
I might add to people who do not know Wendelin Niedlich that he was not just somebody with a bookshop, but a center of intellectual cultural life in Stuttgart, who was also organizing exhibitions. One question I had, you had friends at the Art Academy back then. Mm-hmm. Did you show that these images right away? What was their perspective? Or did even your friendships with them influence your take on abstract or contemporary art?
Yeah, that was really most likely somehow a hidden backup and encouragement for me, I guess. They are roughly my age. And as it happens, my girlfriend, later my wife, was one of them. So I had in her a permanent exchange, about what I was doing there, and she was doing totally different. And then others joined when we were hanging out in the evening almost every night. So somehow it was unavoidable that I showed and we talked about, and there was never any resistance or so. They accepted this. However, we did not even talk about, now, could that be considered to be art, or isn't it wrong? It was, Margit, immediately accepted because I belonged to them, and this is what I was doing. Okay, so nobody objected. Fantastic.
And interesting enough, you early on you were exhibiting in art galleries, and you published together with established artists. So in a very practical sense, you were part of the at least Southern Germany art scene at the very first moment.
The greatest event here for me, I think I cannot underestimate the importance of this, was me meeting Karl Otto Gutz. Karl Otto Gutz, he may be forgotten now, but after World War II, he was one of the leading artists in Germany, West Germany, abstract expressionism. And I meet him at a conference in Recklinghausen in 1966. So somebody had put up a art and education conference, and why that fellow invited me as well as, to the contrary, Karl Otto Gutz, I cannot tell you, but I was invited, he was invited. So we met, and from this developed a wonderful discourse between him, an established artist, and me, a young guy who has no knowledge of anything. So Gutz invited me to Kunstakademie Düsseldorf. Would you believe this? Invited me for a talk in his institute. They didn't have institutes. Fantastic. So already then in 66, I do not know of anybody in the computing field who had such chances. I don't know anybody, by far not.
It's interesting that you mention Karl Otto Gutz, who was, because I was about to talk about Max Bense, who was also very interested in Max Bense's turn on information aesthetics, though he said it's absolutely incomprehensible and unreadable.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, when Max Bense read this famous article by Gutz on electronic painting, I think it was published in 1960s, 1961, he was also somehow puzzled, not knowing exactly where this would lead to. But my question to you, as Bense seemed to be influential both on you and Karl Otto Gutz, was Bense had this idea to bring information theory and art together, to make art measurable, to have an objective art critique, and also in a certain way to plan innovation, to plan originality. And already in 1960, he had speculated on the possibility to use the computer to make visual artworks, but he had no idea yet how that could work. But my question would be...
It's just not necessarily Bense in 60 computers, but machines. No, he knew Harry Walter, who was doing with little machines like similar to Tinguely. So machines, but then soon enough computers. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, there is a famous conversation on the radio where he, being attacked by the journalists, he says, well, one day the computer will be able to predict what a painter like Meistermann will paint within the next 5 years. Yeah. But what I wanted to know is, I mean, he was in a constant provocation of the German art bourgeoisie. How important was his theory for you, or just in a speculative way, if he would not been there in Stuttgart, if you would have not gone to his lectures, because he gave you a model to describe what you do, terms, words. What do you think would have happened if he would not have been there? I mean, it's a little speculative, but maybe this is an inspiration for you to talk about his influence.
It is a great question indeed, and we can answer it only in a speculative way, indeed, because what would have happened if not? No, that's impossible. I can, however, say two observations of real influence, namely, Bense's generally rational way of doing philosophy had a great influence on me. I was always going to his lectures, and that convinced me, even in art, because he had these exhibitions, even in art, a rational approach is possible, is not from the beginning on wrong. No, that was extremely important. And the second thing is that when Georg Nees had that exhibition in February, this now became, so to speak, in some sense, a daring event that Bense staged. But Bense wanted to be provocative. This now showed me that it is possible that at least a guy like him would accept what I was doing. And that was the case. That was the case. Bense, I went to Bense after the exhibition of Nees in 65 and told him, look, would you come to the computing center? I have drawings like these myself, and I believe, Margit, mine are better. I believe this. But Bense says, yes, that's very good, but I don't come. He had already, okay, so therefore this made me to even stronger try to get my own exhibition, which then the gallerist, Wenzel Niedlich, said, but Bense must open it. So I approached Bense, will you open it? Yes, yes, yes. But then he didn't come. No? And he insisted, I do it only if Nees also shows his works. No? So that's how the relation was there. Bense had already decided Nees, no? And now there is somebody in Stuttgart that he didn't like that much. But these are all stupid anecdotes. They show, from a more general point of view, the time was mature for this kind of drawings being shown as if they were art. And I believe Georg Nees and myself, we were proud enough of doing this, even though the reaction was largely negative, largely. FAZ wrote a paper, horrible, an article, large article, horrible. Pfeiffer was horrible. He was full of disgust, so to speak. How dare these people? And Margit, this was after the second, I immediately had another exhibition. By the way, I immediately sold. Georg Nees didn't sell anything. I immediately sold out of the Niedlich exhibition, but then I had a second in January '66, and that made it to national reactions. Spiegel, television, FAZ. Wow!
Yeah, I may make a link to today's discussion. Maybe ask you to repeat or to elaborate on something you just said. Like right now, there's a battle ranging in social media and the newspapers between the established art world and those artists who are publishing their NFTs, like digital artworks, which are cryptographically certified. And for the established, so-called established art world, the producers of these graphics are not real artists and their work have no art value. So if we compare that to what happened back then, I mean, there are a number of possible reactions how the art world might have reacted. I mean, curiosity, panic, indifference, or contempt. From what I read from newspapers, I would say there was no panic, at least more a certain curiosity, sometimes indifference, but certainly a very clearly uttered contempt. What was your, how did you perceive that back then? And maybe what's your view today on that?
Then, if I remember correctly, to some extent I will remember correctly, then my thoughts were, the press. So I would have preferred, I guess, that they are thrilled. And something. But since immediately that was the reaction, I turned this into positive. Yes, again, I'm provocating. I'm doing something that they don't like, so it must be good. Had it been different, it would have been way too boring in a sense. I would have been flattered, of course. But then the fact that I did indeed immediately sell some pieces for cheap prices, that, of course, encouraged me a lot. Because that told me, there are people who find this interesting enough, such that, again, it is cheap. But they bought this. And I almost immediately in '66, 1 year later, or half a year roughly, I immediately produced a little series that I sold. They were not prints, one as the other. They were drawn. Each one of them was originally drawn, small little things, because otherwise it would have been too expensive. And most likely, very important, Margit, was the following stupid little anecdote that I believe is not known. There was in Basel, Switzerland, he was a collector and he did things. What was his name? Laszlo. Christ. Laszlo was his second name. I forget his first name. So he somehow came to Stuttgart, to Niedlich. Maybe he did this several times or so, this I don't know. So Niedlich calls me up in the institute. Frieder, you must come to the gallery. Here is somebody who is interested. I cannot tell you. This is most likely December '65. So I went there, and this fellow immediately says, okay, we must do something. he had a little funny lifestyle magazine. And in the next February or so, 66, he had asked me, okay, and I always have from some artist a, how do you call that? No, a graphic that is put into an extra edition 200. No? So he invited me to do this. Therefore, I was immediately again on another level accepted as an artist. And I appear, Panderma was the name of that magazine. I appear there, with this extra gift to those who pay a bit more, acknowledgement. So these are all little anecdotes that add up to a more general picture of, on one hand, the ordinary journalists, they don't know what to do. They are full of contempt. At least this is boring, a machine. How can this be art? And so forth. All these reactions that I could, because of the other part, just ignore. Because there were those funny, apparently also somehow outlaws or not the mainstream, and the non-mainstream accepted what I was doing.
I may add that one of the first museums who ever bought computer art or computer-generated art was the Musei Suvremenom Ignosti in Zagreb. And I think you sold them for, I think, 50 D-mark piece.
This is a typical price, yeah. I tell you, I had, because when people ask me to buy, I thought, oh, that's nice. But on the other hand, no, I cannot do this, because that was, I don't enter the art market, clearly out of political reasons, and therefore I defined a measure. I had the extra thing I do not remember the number of, but I took the time it took the drawing machine to draw the drawing. And then I multiplied this by one particular, this I do not know. Yes, the first few were sold for 20, 40, 50 mark. The Hommage à Paul Klee was sold for 80. That was the most expensive.
It's interesting that we're now talking about the acceptance in the art world, that we're doing this in terms of the market.
Yeah.
And in terms of money.
Yeah.
Because it made me think of your manifesto, There Should Be No Computer Art, where you heavily criticize the relation of art and the market.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to sum up briefly some of your arguments. You said that on a visual level, computer art had added nothing to contemporary art, so no formal innovation, and that it was simply another fashion for the art market needs, and that artists in that sense used a new medium to perpetuate the situation, new methods, old results, looking looking for success at the art market. So with now, that's been now 50 years ago that you published There Should Be No Computer Art. In a way, this was your goodbye to the artistic production almost, and it was a slightly negative result. But what do you think were the actual important contributions of the so-called computer art to the discussions in aesthetics and to contemporary art? And did you have the impression that in the long run it changed something? It added something?
Yes. The quick answer to the last question you just said is a clear yes, in capital letters, all three. Yes, it has changed dramatically. Now I say a longer answer, that is, I believe, or that will probably not be shared by many, what I'm going to say, because it will sound a bit arrogant. It will sound a bit arrogant. By the time 65, these first exhibitions happen, just 3 of them, that was a provocation. Then there is a time when a few more of those, and it develops a bit up to 1968, London, cybernetic serendipity, and Zagreb, new tendencies. That for me is, now there is the full acceptance. The full acceptance. 2 large international exhibitions take this up. And from there, now take again the year, Margit, 68. This is the other side. And I'm engaged in the 68 movement. Okay, so now I'm torn between a somehow, to some extent, personal success and my convictions politically. Therefore, a little bit later, when I'm in Vancouver and I had emigrated to Canada in 71, there should be no computer art. It takes a while before I get to at least this understanding of my own contradiction that I must live with. There is this, and then there is the other. And since I'm now in a totally new situation, I can claim to leave that field. There should be no computer art. And indeed, you have summarized this. It is, I have a principally anti-capitalist conviction. This is expressed in this manner then. Now, the fact that changes, and the fact that when it happens, I base my argumentation on the market, this was with me all the time. But of course, meanwhile, I had been successful in selling. Before I went to Vancouver, I cannot tell you, Margit, but I had probably sold by the time 100 or 150 pieces or so. This is not a huge, and each one of them was rather cheap, but I could consider myself to be a successful artist in some way, who is provocating. I tell you the anecdote that has to do with my coming to Vancouver. I was in Toronto, and somebody told me Vancouver is much nicer than Toronto. So I write to the computer science department in Vancouver. I hear you have a position in computer graphics. What should I do in order to apply? I don't hear from them, but then after some while, I get a letter. You have got the position. Now, fantastic, no? I had not even really applied. They did not have my CV and nothing. Why was that so? Because of my name being known. They thought, oh, this fellow would be interested in. This fight, this contradiction in my own existence, again led to a success. And therefore, there should be no, on one hand, and on the other hand, I'm doing it, comes together in a personal success. Funny.
May I repeat one part of my question? When you said it did not add anything to art on a formal level, yeah. It perpetuated power relations, which already existed. So were there certain aspects, a positive impact of those early aesthetic experiments with computers on aesthetics, on theory, on contemporary art?
Yeah. Thank you. And indeed, I wanted to start with that, and then I totally forgot it immediately. Thank you. Yes, indeed. When then I wrote it doesn't add anything to art. I meant it seriously. Looking back, that was wrong. That was right by the time in what appears on the walls is not really interesting, however proud you may have been of this. But what did not appear on the walls was sensational, and we all now live of it. What is the new? The end of the work of art as a static image. Art in now our times, and that's the content of using computers, of algorithmic art, is the work as a process, the work as an infinite series. There is, in my mind, indeed, I'm convinced of this, there is no future for the individual piece to be bought. Art in our times must happen, so to speak. You must turn on the computer and then it runs, not as a video loop, but indefinitely long for all times, without ever repeating. The final dissolvement of the individual piece. Of course, there will be artists who draw and paint individual pieces and do even more, and even something that is moving and so forth. But what the appearance, what the use of computers in an innocent way in the mid-60s to produce aesthetic object really stands for is away with all traditional art, dissolve it into infinite, into the infinite happening of art. And that's revolutionarily new. Hardly anybody is thinking of it this way. I want to produce such works. I have done a few. The homage à Gerhard Richter is of that kind. It's not good enough yet. It's not good enough yet. But I will do more. I will do something, Margit, I will do something. And then I sneak to ZKM. And would you please, Peter, Margit, but Peter will not be there anymore. I want to show you something.
We hear 7 days of the week. I really profit of this conversation to ask you a few things I've wanted to ask you for a long time. So when we asked you to explain briefly the title you chose for the conversation, you gave us the precise pleasures. You gave a short explanation, and there you quoted LeWitt with a quote from 1967, and I may briefly repeat it. When an artist uses a conceptual form of art, it means that all of the planning and decisions are made beforehand, and the execution is a perfunctory affair. The idea becomes the machine that makes the art. So now I refer to your text from 1973, The Separation of Head and Hand. And there you view this development, the separation of head and hand, very critical. And there you wrote, I abbreviate, that it is the capitalist logic to which art is also entirely subjected, automation, and that automation promises that people can then take care of more important problems because they have time to think. The effect, however, the real effect, however, you say, is not that they have time to think about more important matters. They are simply more alienated from their work through this process of automation. And you say that the rationality of programmed art is opposed to the irrationality of capitalism. So back then, your view on this separation of the craftsmanship and the conceptual part of art was also very critical. And could you maybe comment on that?
Yeah. That's difficult, but rich and deep into my convictions and into my contradictions. Really, this is the time just before 68, the time of those great hopes that many had in the left, and I believe I belonged to them. Great hopes that we will never positively relate to the society we are part of. We want a new kind of society. Okay, then if you are somehow in your day-by-day work and thinking, somehow at least touching the art, the fact that LeWitt, and this is 66, when he wrote this, the idea becomes the machine that makes the art. That was, of course, fantastic. I didn't read it in 66, a little later, I forget when, but I told my friends I would like to write a letter to Sol LeWitt, namely, thank you very much for having said that and published in his, sentences on art, and then statements on art. Thank you for this. I'm very sorry having to tell you that I have already done it. The idea becomes the machine that makes the art. And indeed, this is how I felt when I read this. I was happy that somebody had expressed this in a wonderful slogan, of which I was indeed firmly convinced that that's what I do. Much later, Margit, I took on the following simpler formula: think the image, don't make it. And in the 60s and into the 70s and 80s, when I was not having reached that state yet, but it was already contained in Sol LeWitt's sentence. The idea, there you have the thinking, becomes the machine that makes the art. My pride is that you must stop there. The idea becomes the machine. Because now the making is no longer important. By the time I did not understand that the making is, in a very strict sense, no longer important, because it is to happen. What I said before already. You think the image, you don't make it. And that is our times. Our times, it has become more and more determined almost by semiotic processes, and no longer so much by mechanic or thingly processes. We are in a more and more, should I say, that is difficult to say. I use the term anyway. In a virtual world, I don't like it, because it is not virtual. There must be conceivable, perceivable things, and they are material. It's not virtual. But there is something, semiotic is much better. We are engaged in semiotic processes, and they are always continuing. There is no end. To produce an image, even to produce a drama on stage, starts and ends. But we are in the permanent process. That's the new. And you realize I am repeating this.
There is one question from Pure. It's, I'm going to read it out to you. When creating, what is the influence of surprises in your program? Do you attempt to erase them or follow the unexpected paths they create?
Yeah, there is, when you write a program, there is, of course, always errors. You know, there is no programs without errors, but that's true. I tell you, I gave you those two images. Would you bring up the second one, the homage à Paul Klee? Senior? Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot. Now I reveal something here in public that I should not. Nobody has noticed this yet. If you look to the right border of this drawing,
yes,
you should detect errors. Right border and take the part on top, no? Top right. You see some lines in there, oblique lines, that run from top or from bottom up to the actual boundary. This is an error. They are not supposed to do this. It's a programming error. I hate myself for revealing this now. It's a programming error in which sense? If you look anywhere else in this drawing, you see, let me call it cells, you know, being built by an upper slightly oblique and a lower also slightly oblique line, which are drawn, and then two vertical lines that you don't see. You see these cells. I bet you see them. The oblique or vertical lines inside such a cell must be inside the cell. This point up there to the right that I pointed you to, where the oblique lines, so to speak, run out of the drawing paper, do run out because the error was that there should have been a boundary for the cell. No? But the cell went a little outside of the image, all the right boundary along. No? So nobody has ever asked me, why is that so up there? No?
Probably art historians more and more will look more closely to those works over the years, and somebody will have seen it one day, but now you've revealed it.
We should hope. No, we should hope, and then they are friendly that they didn't tell me.
There's another question. I may read it out to you. What piece of advice would you give to individuals exploring and creating algorithmic generative art today? And I think it's somebody who is himself an artist of generative art. Most likely, yeah, most likely. That's a really beautiful question that I feel moved immediately because somebody most likely younger than me is asking me such a question, and I will say something, but my first answer is I cannot answer this. I cannot answer it, but I will. Why can I not answer it? The young person should find out him or herself, I think. You know, I don't want to give advice. What I, of course, would like being confronted with such a flattering question is that, oh, let's sit together over a glass of wine, or let's be in a gallery discussing something that we see there, and then talk about this. But an advice that is expecting too much from him or her who is asked to give some advice. And I can do only my stupid things. But I do not want to escape the question, which means I will give you a very general answer only. And that is, do your own
thing. Trust your own capabilities. And if you do so, and in the process of doing so, of course, take opportunities to talk with him or her, whoever it is. But essentially, we should gain enough self-confidence to stand in for our own decisions.
I may squeeze in one question of mine before we go on with other questions.
And I should say thank you, Aaron, for having asked these questions. It would be nice if we could meet.
I want to ask something related to information aesthetics. I mean, the great idea was the interest in measuring existing works of art, that if you statistically analyze enough artworks, that you would find out about the rules, the repertoire, the probabilities of what is chosen. So you could, in a way, algorithmically grasp the style of an artist. So new art is generated from art that was already made. So, and today that's a logic, of course, which can be found in a lot of art projects using AI, because it often is based on analyzing existing artworks and then deriving new works from that. What I wanted to know, did you ever try to algorithmically grasp the style of a given artist's work? Mm-hmm. Or is that approach of any interest for you?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. With great emphasis. Yes, Margit, you should know I'm the permanent failure. I start new things quite often. I never finish anything. Roughly, that's characterizing my kind of existence. More concrete now, but within this general remark, I wanted. Have I totally given up? Not really. It's so sitting here, but I wanted to do this and that and a fourth and a fifth, a selection of artists whose works I would analyze carefully enough and then write software that would continue the work of that artist who was already dead after his death. So the one case where that went quite a distance, I think I was very close to it, is Piet Mondrian. Clearly, his work is, if you like, so simple that it must be done. And others have done parts of this. I, of course, have a program. I don't know if I still have it somewhere, but I had a program, Project Mondrian. And it had developed to the point where it would clearly, Mondrian reduced to the neoplastic of his career. No? So not the boogie-woogie images. That's important. Or the New York, short little time in New York in the end. To have a program to produce the structure of those black bars is rather simple. And my program did this. I have papers where they are printed out. And then to add to this, how many of these cells that are being produced there should be colored? 1 or 2 or 3 or even more, but few only. That's also simple. And then decide which one should be yellow, red, or blue. That's much more difficult.
Why was this such of interest for you?
Yeah.
To make this analysis, to formalize, and in a way to mechanize it?
The trivial part is because it was so simple. It was in comparison much simpler than Jackson Pollock, even though Jackson Pollock was on my program also, on my list. No, you could say, well, that's simple. No, only be random enough, then you get some Jackson Pollock, but it is more difficult. The other part of the answer is because it was so difficult. Because what I wanted to do, now this I've never told anybody, was outrageously arrogant. I wanted, and I had prepared this in Toronto. It had developed quite a while. I have scanned all of the neoplastic images of Mondrian. I put them in their timely sequence. So this year, some, few, and so forth. I did this in order to have a time sequence of Mondrian's painting. I would then analyze those in this year, how many of the black bars, how improved, okay? And then I wanted to develop a predictory system that out of this given statistics would predict New York Boogie Woogie.
Frieder, I now see there are a lot of questions coming up, so I will read out the first to you. And as it's already 4 minutes to our official end, but maybe we can take 5 minutes more. So the first question: the decimal expansion of P is random. It is something found, not something made. Isn't art at heart the art of selection?
Yes, it is, absolutely and totally. There is the beginning and there is the selection. And the selection, if you do anything with algorithms, is of course a great task, because in nowadays, you must do this because you start your program. The program should be complex enough. You start it, and within an hour, you have 100 images. No? So you must now select. And of course, that's funny, that's great, because you must throw away most of them unless you declare each one produced by the computer will be shown. No? But that's, of course, horrible. To be an artist means you must be a great decider, decision maker. No? Because most of what you do is crap, and you must be strong enough to throw it away. I'm absolutely convinced, yeah.
So the next question, would you agree or disagree that algorithmically generated art is somehow a co-creation between the artist and the so-called agency of the machine?
A co-creation, no. With a small little, a capital N-O and a small little yes. No? Co-creation only in the sense that the machine is doing something that the human involved in here is not doing. But that's again, think the image, don't make it, because the machine is making it. You know, we have transferred the making to the machine. No? We are not, we just don't touch the brush and color. No? We are thinking the image. Our contribution is an intellectual, a conceptual. We are the real conceptual artists, the radical. So LeWitt is a coward because he only says he is developing the concept, but he is still making the art. We are developing concepts in a machinic form called program.
There is a remark you might like to react on by Simon Ingram, also an artist. I enjoy the leap into the infinite series as the significance of the 65 work very much. Yet a new kind, mind at work, seems embodied in the drawings themselves.
That's a nice statement.
Yeah.
A very friendly one. Yeah. It's really friendly. Thank you very much. The nice thing is that the potentiality of infinity is put into the program. If the program is developed good enough, only the potentiality. And we are, if we really run the program all the time, then we'll realize, oh, the individual works are really no longer interesting. And we need a totally different, we need to leave the gallery and occupy the open space. You know? In the open space, you can have this somewhere. In a train station, you run it, no? And people miss their trains because what you show there is so interesting that they just stay and look, wow, that's great. Oh, my train is gone. and then you sue the artist. You sue the artist to give you your money back.
Now there's a question on what you are working on at the moment, and if newer technology has shifted your creative approach.
With great regret, I say to the last part of the question, no, with great regret. I made all sorts of public confessions here. That's horrible. I'm too old now to engage in those new technologies. They came up a bit long ago, these NFT, they are called, came up and all that absolutely needs that new technology. No, I'm just too old. I'm very sorry to admit. And the other part is, oh yes, I will die before I can do the projects that are on my list, and often with some notes, paper that contains what I want to do. I want to do a few more, and I do hope I get the opportunity to do it. I want to do a few more homages to other artists. I have started one, but this has been dormant now for quite a while, homage to Malevich. That would look simple, and of course I mean only his suprematist part. Of course the other I cannot touch, way too difficult. But that I want to do because Malevich's Black Square, 13 and then again 17, in some sense, many do so, is the end of painting. The ultimate, the end, the collapse, and so forth, the black square. So if that was the end, now meanwhile, we are 100 years, more than 100 years later, roughly 100 years, can I claim, now we come out of the end of the black square, again with something new. I do it for the sake of the argument. But this is my, should I say, in thinking program, beyond or after Malevich. It is a bit awkward because of those 100 years and the explosion of art, of visual arts in the 20th century. Yeah.
I think we're coming to an end. I have a question which goes in a totally different direction. You have been always a very political engaged person. You have, in 1968, you have protested with the students and the workers in front of the factories. You even were a candidate for the Bremen Parliament. And you told me that you don't give advice, but you give reading recommendations. And so you keep recommending to students that they should read Karl Marx. Why?
Yeah.
And what would you recommend to read?
That's a different kind of question. And Margit, just as on a formal level in between, since we have these more questions, I will immediately return to the Mars question. Since we have all these other questions, will there be a way that I can at least in some way answer them?
There's one more question which we can answer, but we can also, if somebody wants, we can bring you in direct contact.
Okay, yeah, good.
If anything is not answered now.
Mm-hmm. Because I want to do this, it would be a pity if you take the trouble of asking such a question and then you don't get an answer to it. The Karl Marx question, why? No, first of all, do you know, does anybody else of those who are listening know that Capital Volume 1, should I say the main work by Karl Marx? I don't know if he would agree, I say so. This belongs, would you believe it, to the World Heritage of UNESCO, World Cultural Heritage. I said this wrongly. Okay, is that important? No, it's not important. But it tells you that that book is considered by most likely not Marxists as in whatever sense as an extremely important one. This is only to lend more weight to the answer I will give you. In my life, there were 2 books only that influenced me. I've read many, many more books. No, yes, and I buy 5 books per week. Never be able to read them again. But there were 2 who influenced me heavily. The first one was Capital Volume 1 by Marx. No? Is that important? No. If I was so impressed, then I should say why. It changed my life. Reading the Capital changed my life. All of my thinking afterwards has become totally different. And I cannot, for instance, now teach a class, which I do all the time. Just before we met, I was teaching. I cannot teach any class without, and this is in computer science and in digital media, without in one or the other way referring to Marx, not in order to, to make propaganda or so. In my way of teaching, this shows up. In most cases, in my preparation, I have not thought, okay, and where do I put Marx something or a quote? Never. I now meet my students and I talk and we discuss and something, and I cannot avoid but mentioning this or that. So from this personal experience, I firmly believe that others should perhaps try to, if they only ask themselves, and now why is that guy, this old dying guy, why is he so influenced by that old communist? You know? I tell you, the other book is Maturana and Varela, you know? The Tree of Knowledge. You know? So that is radical constructivism. You know? So Marxism on one side and radical constructivism on the other side are the 2, should I say, mental or intellectual or cultural great influences in my life. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for revealing also that. Now, I would read out the last question I see here. What do you think? Why isn't algorithmic art part of the curriculum in schools yet? Even algorithmic thinking becoming more and more important for schools?
Wonderful question. I take up the second part that you didn't put as a question, but as a remark. You say, even when algorithmic thinking is now apparently, I didn't know this, infiltrating into schools. Absolutely necessary. Absolutely necessary. We cannot live, and you, those who are really much younger than me, most likely, I hope for you, you are growing into a time that is thinking algorithmically. Now, I am totally in favor of this. Statement number one. Second, be careful. Because when it gets into schools, there is a danger, I sense, that now everybody thinks algorithmically all the time. Wrong. Because algorithmic thinking is only algorithmic thinking. And that means we are thinking then in terms of computability. Only the computable then, if we reduce our own thinking to thinking algorithmically, only the computable exists. And all the other in algorithmic thinking doesn't exist. We are not computable. We should not allow ourselves to, except for certain purposes, think algorithmically. I had a PhD student. He finished maybe 2 years ago, his PhD thesis from Columbia, whose thesis was algorithmic thinking. So I know what I'm talking about here, but we must be careful that the human does not, never give up, now how should I call it? Dialectical thinking, thinking in contradictions. And algorithms are no good at all in contradictions. We are those who are always living in contradictions. In fact, life is contradictory.
So there are more questions. I read them out. New algorithms like GAN, I think that's
generative adversarial
artificial adversarial networks can analyze a set of images and can create images that can fit into the set. And a new artist selects from the images created by the machine and exhibits them. Is the machine becoming the artist or the artist becoming the curator of the machine?
Mm-hmm. The machine is not becoming the artist. And you know what is nice is the GANs are on such a higher level of technology than what my time was, but the question is the same that was asked in 65 already. Is the machine becoming the artist? No, never. Never an atom only. Because we are controlling the machines. And yes, of course, neural networks have the potential that me as an individual will not understand this particular neural network. That doesn't make it more powerful than me. If I don't understand it, I could try to understand. And most likely I would get together with 2 others and then we do it. This is all. Now, you realize in my answers to such questions, I'm extremely old-fashioned, because I defend the human against the machine forever until I die. And I don't want to be buried somewhere. I want to be thrown into the sea, so away with him. But if I dared to have a grave, then that grave should have an inscription. I was human. I wish you will stay human, for all those who pass by. No, we are not machines, and machines cannot have anything. No, these machines we are talking about must get what they do in computable forms. That's the most important observation. And we are not computable.
It just came to my mind that if one day there will be empathetic machines, they will come to your grave where it's written, I am human, and they will chat and tell each other that's been one of the most amazing and wonderful humans that has been on this planet.
Absolutely fantastic. There must be somebody now who does a movie, you know, and that's the plot.
But we really now have to come to an end. Everybody who wants to get in contact with Frieder, it will be a pleasure to get you in contact. So Frieder, thank you so much for your time and your openness to answer all the questions. And have a nice evening, the public, your viewers, but also you, Frieder. And thank you and goodbye.
Margit, let me quickly answer. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you much. And thanks to all you who have been listening and even giving us those questions. Margit and I she will tell me what I must do in order to send you answers in one or the other way. Thanks for the opportunity.
Bye-bye.
Bye.